Today, we will be continuing the short story by Jean Paul Sartre, The Wall. The story Wall was Sartre's personal response to Spanish Civil War. He wrote it during a period when he felt hopeless about the growing forces of fascism in Spain. The story also outlines Sartre's philosophy of existentialism. The Wall, along with Sartre's existentialist novel Nausea, helped solidify Sartre's literary reputation. The story Wall, it's a short existential story that examines the reality of death. Low and plain style of language is used. It is set in a prison cell. It mentions the lack of God or the prayer, belief in God. The physical existence is a focus, but it is understood that the physical existence is not helpful in understanding the reasons for death. The protagonist of the story is very much pessimistic, harsh, daunted, and he wishes to remain hard. The major conflict is defining death and emotions about it. According to the protagonist of the story, no god is present, name used in vain by Tom twice in the story. Major conflict is defining death and emotions about it. The tone is very anxious. John and Tom display this. The resolution unsettling reality, that is, Pablo, although not being selfish like Julia or Winston, Mrs. Hunston, is still fated to cause Ramson's death. Therefore, we can say that the theme death is inevitable, definition of self through the experience of the other. The story of The Wall opens with Pablo, who is attending his own trial. He has been captured by the Phalangists and is being tried as an opponent of the war and a war criminal along with several of his compatriots. When Pablo goes on trial, he claims that he doesn't know where Ramson Gris is. While awaiting his sentence, Pablo shares a cell with two other men. One of the men is Tom, who fought for the International Brigade during the Spanish Civil War, and Juan, whose only crime was having an anarchist brother. Both Tom and Pablo believe that they will be executed, but are told that Juan will be set free. However, all three prisoners are told that they will be executed in the morning. Juan stops protesting in his innocence. Shocked to silence by his news, he just sits down and turns grey. Tom tries to comfort him but is rebuffed. Instead of trying to think about death or avoid it as much as possible like Tom does, Pablo realizes that he should accept death so he can spend the time reminds preparing himself for it mentally rather than fighting against it emotionally. Pablo is trying to think about anything but death. He thinks of his past, but it doesn't seem important anymore. The doctor offers to give a message to the man's loved ones. Nevertheless, he feels utterly alone and disconnected from the world around him as he prepares for his execution. When the time for execution arrives, Juan starts to cry and shout. He doesn't want to die. Tom points out that daylight is almost breaking, so they can see their deaths coming soon enough. The soldiers take them away from the cell and leave Pablo in there alone for an hour before he finally hears shots being fired outside his cell. Pablo wants to scream but decides not to because it will be unmanly of him, and instead he tries to remain calm despite what's happening around him in order to save face as a man. Finally, the soldiers take him to a room. They try to intimidate him, but he finds it amusing and ridiculous. The officers questions him about Raymond Gress again, but Pablo doesn't tell anything. Later, he decides to lie to them and tell them that Raymond is hiding in a cemetery. 30 minutes later, one of the officers comes back. He tells Pablo that he's going to be tried by a regular court rather than a military tribunal because his crime doesn't merit execution. Pablo doesn't understand why he isn't being executed right away because this was that they told him would happen if he didn't confess. He spends the rest of the day with his fellow prisoners until it is time for dinner at 5 p.m. That night, Pablo sees a baker he knows. The baker tells him that the Flanges captured Raymond. Apparently, Raymond left his safe house due to an argument and went to hide in cemetery. So the soldiers found him in the gravedigger's shack just as Pablo said they would. Pablo passes out from laughing so hard at how well his plan worked. So Pablo wakes up on the ground and starts laughing again because he is happy with himself for getting rid of Raymond once and for all.